Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to those who may be joining us from the Americas. Welcome to Practicing Leadership Resilience in Turbulent Times. Thank you so much for joining us for what promises to be a very exciting session today. I'm Benjamin Kessler, Managing Editor of INSEAD Knowledge. INSEAD Knowledge is INSEAD's Faculty Insights portal, and we invite you to join us at our website. And one particular point of interest is our COVID-19 vertical. We have dozens of articles on all major aspects of the COVID-19 crisis, so please do check it out. Or you can download our free mobile app on Google Play or iOS App Store. And that brings me to introducing our speaker for today, Narayan Pant, Chaired Professor of Leadership Development at INSEAD. Narayan works with leaders to improve leadership effectiveness. He directs INSEAD's Senior Leadership Program, LEAP, Leadership Excellence through Awareness and Practice. The program focuses on enabling leaders to transform organizations through transforming themselves. And that's a big part of his mission here today in this session. So without any further ado, please let me introduce Narayan Pant.
Thank you, Ben. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm going to do three things over the course of the next 30 minutes or so. First, I'm going to talk about what is resilience and why does it matter, right? So it's a salient question. There's so much talk about resilience everywhere that, it's a good idea to get ourselves on the same page when it comes to talking about what is it that we're talking about. So what is resilience and why does it matter? The second thing I'm going to talk about is the essence of resilience. The essence of resilience lies in the exercise of choice. And that choice is actually in your hands. It's not given by the environment or given by somebody else or invested in you by something. It's your choice. You get to choose whether to be resilient or not. That's the second point I'm going to make. And the third point I'm going to make is to invite you to practice, right? So these are the three things that I'm going to say, and let me just get started. And as Ben said, there's going to be lots of opportunities for questions along the way. So let me start with the idea of resilience. Here's a psychological definition of it, and it looks appropriately psychological. I think you'll agree. But let's just look at what it's saying. It says, resilience refers to the role of mental processes and behavior, right? What are mental processes? Quite simply, thoughts and feelings. So what this is saying is resilience refers to the role of thoughts, feelings, and behavior, right, in promoting personal assets. What are personal assets? Well, there are capabilities. There are things we're capable of. There are capacity to do things. There are determination. All these sorts of characteristics of ours, these positive characteristics of ours, is what is meant by personal assets. So how do we use our thoughts and feelings and our behavior to leverage our capabilities to protect us from the potential negative effects of stressors? Now, this sounds logical, but intuitively, the way people internalize this is they say to themselves, what that means is, when I get knocked down, do I get up or not? And at the outset, that's a good sort of perspective to start with, right? I've even heard it said that resilience is getting up the 9th time when you've been knocked down 8 times, right? But you know and I know lots of people who encounter a knockdown and they get up and they're just barely able to stand and they're woozy and they're kind of, to me, that's really not resilience. I remember a colleague I used to work with, this was maybe 20 years ago, and this was one of the finest sort of partners in a consulting firm that I'd ever met. And this guy claimed, you knock me down, I get back up. And sure enough, his history was that of a person who got knocked out of one organization, went to another organization. But there was a time when he was working with 3 groups, maybe at midnight, getting a proposal ready for a client. And one group was in one room in a hotel, another group was in another room, and a third group was in a third room. And so he'd go to one group and get them started, and he'd light a cigarette and he'd smoke the cigarette, leave it in the ashtray, go to the next room, forget that he has a cigarette over there, light a second cigarette in the second room, leave it in the ashtray. This isn't resilience. This is barely survival. So I have a very simple way of thinking about resilience, which may or may not be helpful to you. To me, it's, can you encounter adverse circumstances and emerge stronger from them, right? That's the essence of resilience. And we'll get into it, as we go along. But to me, fundamentally, resilience is about, can you emerge stronger when you encounter adverse circumstances? Why do we need resilience? Very simple reason, right? It happens all the time. In my own limited history, I can remember 1987 October. I was in New York and I was a PhD student when Black Monday happened and stock prices fell by some ridiculous number, 30%, right? And we thought the world was going to come to an end. When you sit in Wall Street and you see these ticker just going and people think the world has come to an end. Well, we survived that. And then 97, I happened to be in Asia in 1997. The Asian financial crisis hit. This created utter turmoil. I don't know how much people in other parts of the world were aware of this, but social unrest actually really raised its ugly head in a number of countries around the region. We somehow survived that. We survived Y2K, where we were actually concerned that because of the structure of the COBOL language, that some missiles would be launched or some dramatic thing would happen, on the eve of January 1, 2001. But we survived that, right? And then the dot-com crisis happened, and then 9/11, and then SARS, and then the global financial crisis. You get my point. This stuff happens all the time. Now, just think about how we prepare ourselves for this, right? How do we prepare ourselves for this? Well, if you're like a lot of the leaders I meet, you do one of two things. One, you try really hard to stop this bad stuff from happening. In fact, many of the people I know consider this their job description. My job description, they will say to me, is to make sure I minimize the impact of bad stuff happening by planning for all the bad stuff that can happen. What's the problem with that? Well, no matter how much you plan, it still will happen, right? So you still need the ability to react when bad stuff happens. The second thing people do is they try and ignore what might happen if they don't manage to stop it, right? It's a little bit like, I don't know if you've seen the children's games where kids run around saying, you can't see me, no, 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 no. So the thoughts get put away somewhere where we say, we're not looking at you, right? Almost as if they're minimized in the corner of our computer screens. But then at some point, accidentally, our cursors go over those thoughts and they flare up and we go, ah, because they don't go away, do they? All these negative thoughts, they still sit there, right? So the thoughts still stay there. And this is the reason why we need resilience, right? We need resilience because we can't control everything, and sticking our heads in the sand simply doesn't work. So what are we going to try and accomplish in the 20 or so minutes that we have in this session, right? My goal is to try and see if I can get you to a place where you're able and willing to work on raising your own resilience. Like I said, this is going to take practice, right? I'm going to do a little bit of practice with you here just to give you a sense of what it feels like to be practicing resilient ways of looking at things, right? But ultimately, you build resilience by practicing yourself. And I'm going to give you access to a lot of resources, websites, exercises that you can do that can help build your resilience, but you're going to have to practice on your own. So my goal is to get you to a place where you want to practice, right? I've got a few priors. Telling you what to do won't work. It didn't work when my kids were teenagers. I don't see why it should work with you now, right? I think all I can do instead is to try and get you to believe that A, you can do this, and B, it will be beneficial to you, right? The one thing I will say to you, though, is be careful about one thing, right? It's quite likely that you will get in your own way, right? One of the first things that psychotherapists do when they work with their patients who are displaying, say, unproductive or dysfunctional behaviors is they try and find out how those dysfunctional behaviors are helping their patients, right? So the reason they say this is because there's a reason why we do the things we do today. And in order to change those things, we have to find out how those things are helping us and find different ways of getting that same help, right? So if you encounter thoughts like, this is all psychological mumbo jumbo, or this won't work for me. Yeah, I tried that. Beware, because you might be setting yourself up to actually not benefit from something that might end up helping you. So let me take a pause here, and then Ben will ask me some questions. But first, let me recap what I've said as a foundation for what we're going to do in 20 or 25 minutes. First, resilience is the ability to encounter adverse circumstances and emerge stronger, right? We need resilience because stuff happens all around us that we can't control and can have adverse impacts on us, right? Trying to plan for adverse impacts all the time doesn't work because we simply cannot plan for everything. And two, running away from it and pretending it's not going to happen doesn't work either because those thoughts come up and bite us. Ben, over to you.
Great, thank you. So first question, just to start it off, why now? Why are we talking about resilience now?
So one of the things that happens, so I think it would be fair to say that we're going through some fairly turbulent times, right?
Sure.
The sorts of pressures that I find, at least the people I work with are under, are pressures like hits to revenues that they've not seen before, potentially decisions about what they have to do with personnel, inability to travel, people who have children, their schools are disrupted. So the amount of stress that people are under right now is just huge. I think resilience is necessary at all times, but turbulent times in particular require resilience.
Makes sense. And so I'm in a bit of an advantageous position because in this presentation, I know what's coming next. And I know that people have a very illuminating experience in store for them, and I don't want to spoil it. But I don't want people to have false expectations. So I want to draw out a little bit about this idea of building resilience being a process that people are going to go through. It's not a one and done. It's not a quick fix solution. So I'll just start out by asking, what can people expect? What kind of progress can people expect to make in the short term when trying to build resilience?
I think the first thing that they can hope to get is hope, right? The absence of hope is soul destroying, right? There's no happiness when there's no hope. And so one of the places I'm actually going to point people at the end of this webinar to my website, where I actually talk about a simple exercise that builds hope. And this is something that you can do very easily with 15 minutes over 3 to 4 days, right? Just 15 minutes each day. And when you do that, that changes the way in which you think about the long haul, because building resilience is over the long haul. It's funny, I was reading recently that the Dalai Lama says he still gets angry. Right now, anger is not a resilient reaction, as you know, right? And the Dalai Lama is someone who's been practicing resilience all his life. I don't know how old he is. I think he's 80 something, right? So when he says that he still gets angry, it makes me feel a little reassured, because I've been on this journey myself for, I would say, about 15 to 20 years, and I still feel I got a long way to go. Why is it worth doing it? Because you need to have hope. The things are going to get better. You're going to be able to deal with things better. And you will start seeing signs, small signs along the way. So typically, the way in which you build resilience, think about it as a stochastic process. You encounter, say, a certain number of situations every day. Today, if you don't even know what resilience is, maybe you're resilient in a certain percentage of them, let's say 20%. If you start practicing immediately, you will potentially see an impact, and you will be more resilient in 25% maybe, right? 30%. But as you practice, you will see this percentage go up until you will find yourself increasingly resilient on different occasions. That's what you can hope for, Ben.
And you talk about the goal being of this session to create the space where people are able to build resilience? And what are the biggest obstacles to creating that space?
It's, as I mentioned at the outset, you yourself will be the biggest obstacle to creating that space. You yourself will be the biggest obstacle to taking that step, right? When we're stressed, we feel depressed. And when we feel depressed, we think there's no hope, right? So we typically approach exercises like this or approaches like this and say things like, that's not going to help me, right? You know, I've tried these psychological exercises. They don't work, right? To me, that's the biggest worry you should worry about. Nothing else. I mean, everything else, what do you got to lose? I'm going to give you a few exercises. You're going to try them for a few days, and I think you will see an impact, right? If you practice them for long enough, you will see a significant impact. So the only thing that you should beware is hobbling yourself even before you start.
And one more question I think is really important, because you mentioned that resilience is not simply, you know, taking a licking and keeping on ticking. I mean, that's how people think of resilience, I think,
Yes.
in a popular sense. You know, you're a punching bag and nothing can knock you down. You just
Yes.
keep going. But you're saying you actually become stronger through adversity. And this idea
Yes.
of strength through adversity implies to me some kind of learning process. You're learning from it. So I would love it if you would expand on the connections and potential connections between learning and resilience.
So you make a very powerful point, and that's exactly right? Resilience comes through learning, right? But what are you learning about? And this is key, right? You're not learning about the environment. You're not learning about what went wrong in the environment, because to be honest, what went wrong today will be completely different from what's going to go wrong tomorrow. No, you're learning about yourself. You're learning about how you react. And when you understand yourself a little better, you're able to regulate yourself a little better. That's the hope, and that's the learning.
So do you mind if we just take a question from the audience?
Sure.
Before we move on, because we're going to get very practical with some exercises.
Yes.
But people are asking about the connections, if there are any, between kindness and resilience. Do you see any links in those concepts?
So again, my goal would be to encourage people not to think about this conceptually, but think about it experientially, the way you experience them, right? So what I don't want to say is kindness good, anger bad. You will find very soon, I will ask you and I will show you how you can let these categorizations go. Having said that, there is a form of meditation which goes by kindness-loving meditation, right? Which is a form of meditation that's extremely powerful. Meditation has relevance to building resilience. So in that way, they are connected. However, I would say when we're about to start with the next set and the next segment of this particular conversation, leave concepts out. Try not to think of this intellectually. Try not to intellectualize it and capture it in thoughts and structures and things like that. Just experience it and allow your body to tell you what it is that you're feeling when I talk.
That's great. So I think we should jump into it, and we'll take up some questions in a bit.
Okay. Let me start sharing again. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do something a little peculiar. I'm going to make a request of you, right? If you're like me, when you attend these webinars, you've got a zillion things going on at the same time. You've got your phone on, you've got your TV, your screen on, you're looking at something else. I'm going to invite you to just turn everything off. Sit yourself down comfortably. Literally make yourself comfortable so that you can stay in this position for a little while. Take a few deep breaths. Calm down your thinking. Just slow everything down. Because what I need to do now is to engage you both through thought, feeling, and then potentially observing any visceral reactions you might have as well. So I want you just to be sensitive to what is happening to you and not try and do what we usually do, which is multitask all the time. And that's why I put this nice, pretty picture of this beautiful lake and valley and mountains all around, just so that you can see it, breathe, and get yourself calmed down. Now, I said before I started that resilience is a choice. Well, what is the choice? Well, let me describe it. In fact, better still, let me use the words of someone I admire greatly, Viktor Frankl, to describe the choice. Viktor Frankl was a Viennese psychiatrist who went through a series of concentration camps during the Second World War, ultimately ending up at Auschwitz and surviving Auschwitz, right? And he mentioned that the key to the kind of strength it requires to survive Auschwitz lay not in physical strength, but in a certain kind of attitudinal strength, right? And he described it as such. He says, everything can be taken from a man, forgive the gender associated with that, that's how people wrote, 70 years ago. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. What he said was, what he was saying was, it was possible for him to see people give away their last piece of bread to somebody who needed more, and yet find the strength to survive the next day. Now, at one level, we get this intellectually, but what does it mean, right? I mean, it just sounds like something my dad or some wise guru might say to me. And practically, what does it mean? Well, I hope you forgive me, because I'm going to give you another quote to try and explain what I think it means. Here's another quote, right? This is from Shakespeare. This is from Hamlet, where Hamlet is saying, "For there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." And he's describing a particular scenario. He says Denmark feels like a prison to him. And the people you're talking to kind of look at him weird and said, "No, it doesn't. I mean, Denmark's a lovely place." And he says, "Well, that's good for you, because, then it's not a prison for you. But if I feel a prison, it is a prison, it is, right? Because there's nothing good or bad. Thinking makes it so." Now, this is very, very helpful. Why? Because it gives us a lever, and that lever is our thoughts, right? If resilience is a choice, the choice of how to see something, then now this particular quote gives us a lever to focus on, which is our thoughts. Now, notice these thoughts. These are the sort of thoughts that if you have them, this is not a nice intellectual thought. It hits you in the stomach with an oof. Right? These are the sorts of thoughts that can really not let you sleep at night. They can get your blood pressure raising, your breath goes faster. These thoughts really upset you, and they can weaken your resilience. There's two observations I want to make about these thoughts. One, trying to avoid these thoughts usually doesn't work. I've said this before and I say it again, right? Avoidance is a strategy that today we can say pretty convincingly doesn't work. Right? So try and say, I'm not going to think of that, doesn't work, because that thought still sits there. And because you haven't been looking at it for a long time, when it does pop up, it becomes larger than life. Right? That's the first thing. The second thing, and then just stay with me for this one. The thoughts themselves are neither good or bad. They're facts, right? My department will miss these numbers. But something makes that oof reaction in us. And this is where traditional cognitive behavior therapy comes in. What traditional cognitive behavior therapy does is it says, okay, so here's an activating event. I'm going to miss the numbers. And I have a thought that I'm going to miss that numbers, right? And then I have a really negative reaction, fear, shame, embarrassment, all these sorts of things. What cognitive behavior therapy says is there's an intervening stage that happens between the event or the thought and the actual reaction. And that is some belief I have about what's going to happen. So let's take this simple thought that I could lose my job. Yeah, okay, so what? Well, if I lose my job, then I'm not going to have a salary. And? Well, if I don't have a salary, then I won't be able to feed my family. Really? Well, no, that's not true, because I've got savings, which means that, the family is going to be fed. Yeah, but that's, so there's a whole series of things that are intervening between the thought and the really powerful oof reaction. And a cognitive behavior therapist would sit down and unpack that and say, so is this even logical that you should be having this reaction, given the so many other ways in which you can construct what is happening to you? Now, if you've studied cognitive behavior therapy or you're seeing a therapist, this is a great approach. However, if you're just someone who kind of says, look, I want to build resilience, then going off and reading large books and trying to understand them and so on and so forth is not a good use of your time. Fortunately, there's a much easier way of doing this, and that is the following. 1, observe your thoughts. You know something, ladies and gentlemen, I discovered when I started this process 15 to 20 years ago that we really don't pay attention to our thoughts. There's a whole bunch of things that are going through our heads and we don't notice them. It's when I say, sit down, pay attention, da-da-da, and people go, oh yeah, shit, I've got all these thoughts going through my head, right? And so the first step is to observe those thoughts. The second thing, and I'll explain this in a bit, is diffuse them. What does that mean? It means seeing your thought as separate from you, right? So when you say, I'm so screwed, what happens is you are screwed. But if you see that I'm so screwed is actually a thought you've had, and you look at it and go, sheesh, that's a strange thought for me to be having right now, you have diffused that thought from you. You've somehow made it a thing separate from you. I'll spend a little bit more time on this, right? But if you can do these two things, figure out what are the thoughts that are going through your head at any given point in time and develop the habit of observing those thoughts. And second, view these thoughts as separate from you, not instantaneously you and the state of you at a given point in time, then you manage to reduce non-resilient outcomes. What I'm going to do now is lead you through a simple set of exercises that will help you do precisely this, right? Now, I don't know if you listened to me when I told you to sit down, get comfortable, and take a breath, relax, observe the screen. If you did, great, keep doing it. If you didn't, let me try again, right? Observing thoughts is a little bit like watching them appear on a screen in front of you. Right? You're sitting in a cinema theater and the thought is appearing in a screen in front of you. For example, you see, you're just watching them. And all of these, of course, they're flowing through your head at a much faster rate. But the principle is that you're watching the thoughts as they scroll through your head. Now, there are some ways to watch them that are actually more beneficial than others, and I'm going to describe that. Let's do a simple experiment. Again, make sure you're comfortable, right? Sit down, take a deep breath, relax, and think of a significant decision or some event that lies in front of you. Something that could cause you, or has caused you, quite some stress, the anticipation of which has caused you quite some stress, right? Now close your eyes, think of that event, and observe all the thoughts that go through your head. Just observe them, don't do anything with them, right? I'm going to give you about a minute to do this. Again, close your eyes, take a breath, think of an event that lies in front of you, right? Think of an event that's ahead of you. And just watch all the thoughts that go through your head. Just take a minute. Don't do anything. Just, your mind will wander away. Bring it back to that event or that decision that lies in front of you. Just bring your thoughts back. And just watch your thoughts. Just a few more seconds. Just keep watching the thoughts. Just a few more seconds. All right, you can stop. So I'm going to run a poll right now. Here we go. In the exercise, when you were asked to do it, did you stay with the exercise, observing your thoughts for the entire minute, start the exercise, but then get distracted and do something else, not do the exercise at all? Just go ahead, respond, please. I'm waiting for people to respond. Just waiting for a few more people to respond. Click on that poll in front of you. Okay, I think we're done with voting. So let me end this and share the results. Now, think about what this is saying, right? This is a completely natural sort of outcome. First of all, the fact that we just have 4% and 3 is absolutely brilliant. Because remember at the outset, I said something like, be careful not to undermine yourself, right? But at the same time, you know, things happen. Thoughts go through our head. We say to ourselves, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I got it. I know what he's doing. And then we just don't do the exercise, right? So the fact that you haven't done it, that very few people just didn't do the exercise at all, is an excellent sign. It shows that you're ready to take the step. You're ready to practice. The fact that you managed to actually stay with the exercise, 51% managed to stay with the exercise, is brilliant, right? But it's really not necessary at this stage, because one of the things that happens to your head is that thoughts capture you and they take you away, right? That's the nature of the mind. You start observing thoughts and they take you all over the place, and all of a sudden you discover that you might have left the kettle on, and you go and get the kettle, right? So there is a way in which you can address these, which you can focus on your thoughts, which is actually more beneficial to building resilience. And I'll get to that in just a bit. So let me just go through this and ask you to do this exercise again. Right? Just sit down. I'm not going to keep you for as long now, but I'm going to keep you for a shorter period of time. Once again, I'm going to ask you to focus on an event or a decision that lies in front of you. But this time, instead of just observing the thoughts, try and categorize them into good thoughts and bad thoughts, right? Just take a few minutes, categorize the thoughts into good thoughts and bad thoughts. Just go ahead and do it. Go ahead. Again, think of an event ahead of you, right? Watch the thoughts that go through your head, and then try and categorize them as good thoughts and bad thoughts. Okay, let me stop. Now, one final time, you're going to do the same exercise. But this time, I want you to adopt a completely different attitude. I want you to look at these thoughts like they're warring kids, somebody else's kids, not your kids, right? Warring kids in front of you, right? So you're observing these thoughts. I often like to give the example, you know, I try and limit the amount I drink every week, right? So I say to myself, I won't drink from Monday to Thursday, and maybe Friday, Saturday, Sunday I'll have a drink. And guess what happens? On Wednesday, I get the brilliant idea that this has been a very good day. I actually got 3 pages of writing done, and it's good, and I'm ready to send it to my agent and all the rest of that. I should celebrate with a drink. And then the other voice comes back up and says, yeah, but this is just an excuse to drink more than you said you would, and so forget it. There'll always be reasons why you should have an extra drink on a Wednesday. And then this one comes, yes, but I haven't had an extra drink on a Wednesday for 3. You see where I'm going with this, right? We all have these competing thoughts ahead of us. Now, rather than settling on one thought or the other as the right thought, I just want you to watch them, right? Try it. Again, watch your thoughts like you might watch someone else's quarreling kids fighting in front of you. Take a few seconds, do the same thing. Just watch them. They're not right, they're not wrong. They're just passing through you. You're just observing them. There's no such thing as a thought you shouldn't have. Just observing them. They're going through. Try not to get hooked by them. Watch them go. Watch the other thoughts that come. Okay. This exercise of watching thoughts without judgment, without trying to choose which one is right, actually goes to the heart of building resilience, right? All the exercises in building resilience have to do with reducing the power of thoughts. And at the first step, it requires developing the capacity to observe thoughts without being snagged by them. Now, I certainly haven't gotten to a stage where I'm never snagged by thoughts. It's just that the percentage of time you get snagged by your thoughts declines, right? And that helps you build resilience. I'll talk a little bit more about how that's useful, so on and so forth, but excuse me. This is essentially what is intended by defusing. Seeing thoughts as separate from you. So first, you observe the cacophony that's going on inside and it becomes salient. You're aware of it because it's those thoughts which, even though you may not be aware of them, that are driving the impact and the reactions that you have. The oof reaction that you have when you think about what might happen to your job, your children, and so on and so forth. Right? First thing you need to do is make them salient. When you make them salient, you reduce their power over you by defusing them. And the way you defuse them is by observing them as if they were a separate entity from you, right? So what you've just done is you've actually begun the process by observing them, right? Without getting snagged by them, you've actually observed the process of defusing from them. There's a couple of things that'll help this process, and I'll just make that comment and then leave it be. First, when you articulate the following thing, instead of saying, I think we might screw up, just articulate that as, I'm having the thought that we might screw up, right? Or I don't think we're going to make this month's numbers, right? I'm having the thought that we might not make this month's numbers. Now, this might sound artificial, but it has a very powerful effect. In words, it articulates the fact that this thought is a thing, it's not you, right? So that's the first step, and it's worth practicing. The second step is a whole series of cognitive diffusion exercises, and again, I'll show you a place where you can go on my website, which will give you access to these exercises that you can connect to. Both these things then help the process of diffusion. So again, very quickly, what is the choice at the core of resilience? The choice is in the attitude you take towards a given circumstances, right? Our tendency is to try and control those circumstances, and that is impossible. This is not saying that you shouldn't do your best to control. Of course you should, right? This is your job. You try and look for circumstances, you try and look for things, you build organizational resilience by building slack. You must do these things. I'm saying in addition to that, you must do one more thing. Be prepared to have a useful, a productive attitude when things don't turn out in the way in which you expect. That's the core of resilience. Building that attitude relies on the ability to manage and regulate the way your thoughts impact you. And the key elements to that are A, observing them, and B, diffusing them, seeing them at one remove. That's what I've talked about, and I will readily admit that this feels a little bit like, you know, showing up for your first tennis lesson and the coach saying to you, well, this is a tennis racket, you know, go on, hold it. That's what it feels like. This is a ball, right? Now your job later on, after we're all done, is to go and hit the ball and make sure it lands on that square of the court. I get it. We haven't done anything yet. We've not practiced a lot. And there's a lot of practice ahead. But I just wanted to show you that this is very, very doable. Ben, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Narayan. There are a lot of questions coming through from attendees, and I definitely want to get to those. But first, I just have a few questions of my own, a few burning questions that I have to ask you. You talk about defusing your thoughts, neutralizing your thoughts, stripping away the coloring of good and bad from your thoughts. But if you do that, aren't you hindering your ability to act on those thoughts? If you can't tell good from bad, then how can you translate thought into action?
That's a brilliant question. Very, very brilliant question, right? So our prefrontal cortex is an extraordinary organ, right? This is something that's capable of putting man on the moon, making complex calculations. So in any given set of circumstances, the prefrontal cortices of bright people in organizations and teams are able to compute, sit down, and come to conclusions about what the right way of forward is, given the circumstances, given the information that they have, right? They're absolutely able to do this. What am I talking about? I'm saying it's at that point that the trouble starts, because the voice comes up, oh, but what if so-and-so doesn't like it? And then the voice on the other side could say, yes, but we've considered all the data, and based on the data, this is the right course of action for us. Yeah, but you know, that person has an impact on my promotion. And this is what I'm saying, Ben, right? So I am not at all, you know, sort of saying that I'm somehow undercutting our ability to make sensible and rational decisions about how to act. We must do that, of course. This is why I said, you know, we must try and control our circumstances to the best that we can, right? So by building slack, by building financial slack in our organization, so on and so forth, right? But in addition to that, we must know how to regulate ourselves when shit happens. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
So I want to get a couple more questions in before we start to talk about the attendees' questions.
Okay.
Leaders naturally are going to want to not only think about themselves, even though you said that this is a presentation about yourself, but leaders naturally are driven to think about their teams, how to build resilience in their teams. So I want to kind of ask a two-part question. First part is, what can leaders do to try to build more resilient teams? And the second part is, you know, flipping the hierarchical position. What if the non-resilient people who are making your life difficult are on top of you in the hierarchy, the senior leaders? They're flipping out, you're trying to stay calm. You know, how do you either influence their resilience or manage that situation better?
So let me start with the first question. The best thing leaders can do is show, don't tell, right? So we often get into the mode of, I'm a leader and I need to tell my people what to do. You know what? Just like you know what you need to do, they know what they need to do too, right? But if you show behavior that's resilient behavior, you don't react, right? You have the capacity to say, in a completely authentic way, guys, you know, based on our circumstances, this is the best course of action. But you know what? If we see data that comes out that doesn't correspond, we'll recorrect. So, you know, for now, this is our course of action. And if you can demonstrate that sense that you're comfortable with yourself, others will be comfortable with themselves too, right? There's lots of books about how to build, you know, high-functioning teams and so on. I don't want to get into that space at all. In terms of building resilience, focus on yourself first and the rest will follow.
And I suppose...
Now, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to go to the second part of your question, right? Which is, what if, you know, the non-resilient people are above you and they're screaming and shouting and sending all sorts of things? I almost feel like, you know, repeating the serenity prayer, you know? I know all these things connected with Alcoholics Anonymous for some strange reason. It goes something like, Lord, give me the strength to change the things I can, or no, sorry, what is it? The courage to change the things I can, the strength to bear the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? So I don't want anybody to misinterpret what I've been saying as fatalism. This is not my intention, right? I think it is extremely important that we must fight for what we believe, and we must really push. This is how we make better organizations, better societies. You push envelopes. What I'm saying is, when you fight these battles, you don't need your own thoughts battling you, right? So when you confront, senior leaders, and you have to deliver a message, and you know you're going in there with, this is the right thing to do, and I need to deliver this message, but it could cost me my job. You sit down, you go through the arithmetic and say, are my values something that demand that I take this position? And then you go ahead and do it, right? You don't need the voice that's constantly undermining you saying, yes, but, yes, this. That's where resilience comes in. It calms those extraneous voices down.
Thank you. And I want to jump right into comments from the audience.
Okay.
And I'm going to quote them verbatim because I think it's important to get their actual words. Someone says, you are talking about thoughts, yet how to feel with the very intensive feelings, for example, anxiety, panic, hopelessness, shame, that are much stronger than thoughts and may win over thoughts. Is the only answer practice, practice, practice?
No. There comes a time when all of us need to understand whether we need to seek help. Let's just accept that, right? These are difficult times, and I will put some links on my website to resources where places can give you some insights into whether you're actually going through some form of clinical depression. And if you are going through it, you need to seek help, right? There are enough indicators, there are tests that you can take that will help you do that. On the other hand, there are probably always things that you can do to alleviate the pressure of those negative feelings. And that happens by paying attention to thoughts, right? So thoughts and feelings, we used to think that the linkage headed in one direction, that thoughts drove feelings, but that's not true. Sometimes I have a negative feeling which is driven by an action that I've just taken, and then I make up thoughts to rationalize that feeling, right? So the only reason why we mention thoughts is because thoughts are the only levers that we have some sort of control over, right? Feelings kind of pop up when they want to, right? And so one of the things that we do by practicing, and by the way, the practice is great, it is brilliant, is with time, you reduce the intensity of the peaks, right? Both the peaks and the valleys. You reduce the intensities and you narrow the band of those peaks and valleys. However, please, I want to be very, very careful here. You need to confirm whether this is a situation where you need a different kind of help. And if you do, please get that.
Another attendee says, and again, I'm quoting, third time, it was very difficult to observe thoughts.
Yes.
What happened?
It is not natural for us to see thoughts as outside us, right? Again, there are some diffusion exercises that you can do. Again, you will find these on my website. You go there and you'll see exercises that have to do with leaves in a stream. You can also Google something. Google these two words, diffusion, not diffusion, diffusion as in D-E-F-U-S-I-O-N, right? Diffusion exercise, and you get a series of cognitive exercises that help you separate thoughts from you. It is not natural for us to see thoughts as separate from us, and so therefore you found it very hard to do. However, that does require practice. When you start doing it though, you find it accelerates. It's a bit of an exponential curve. You struggle with it for a little bit, but then you get past the tipping point, and then it's quite easy to see thoughts as something that are external to you.
Narayan, earlier when we were talking about teams, you mentioned the importance of role modeling the behavior, walking the talk, etc. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, what are some examples where you've built resilience in your own life?
I'm an introvert, which is a difficult thing to be when you're an academic, because you're supposed to interact with people, engage with them, really figure out what it is that you can do to help them, work with them, and really, in some sense, be very present for them. This was not a natural act for me. And I had to work on myself. And I realized I could sense the thoughts that go through my head that say things like, you know, okay, you're done. You know, this is your break. Now you can leave. You come back, you know, when the session starts. And I physically had to observe those thoughts and say, no, I'm going to stay here and engage with people and just talk to them and just be present. I don't necessarily have to say anything. I do want to make a point, though. You typically cannot, I find it hard to build resilience in just one moment or in one situation. This practice of observing the thoughts happens all the time. A few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, because of the lockdown, I couldn't go to the gym anymore. I like to go to the gym, so I decided to get a different form of exercise. We are allowed outside the house in Singapore, right? I don't like running, but I started running. And I discovered something by observing thoughts, right? So as I run, the thought very quickly comes into my head that says, okay, so this is good. You've run enough. And I learned to do something. I learned to pay attention to my breath. Was I panting, for example? And I wasn't. Then I started paying attention to my muscles. Were they hurting? And they weren't. So just this random thought came up and said, okay, so you've done enough. And then every once in a while, my thoughts would go away and I'd go somewhere else, and suddenly a thought would come back into the head again saying, okay, so stop because this is hurtful. And I'd just look around, pay attention to my body, pay attention to myself, and I'd notice, no, it's not hurtful. And so every day when I go and I run a little bit, it becomes an opportunity for me to just practice this business of paying attention to what is happening to the entire body. And that then allows you to bring it into more important or significant occasions, if you like, right? Places where you're going to have difficult conversations, things of considerable salience or significance. You can bring the same habits because you've practiced them in multiple different contexts.
People are asking a lot of questions about the practical tools, and you've made several references throughout the talk to meditation, to things people can look up online. I wonder if you could, maybe walk them through it in a bit more detail about what you found to be helpful on how people can get hold of resources to help them build resilience.
Right. So I think if you like, and if you have patience to do this, there are a few easy to read pieces that you will find on my website, right? They talk about the bases for resilience and how you can go around building resilience. That I'll give you the link to the website later on. And then they say, here are a few simple exercises that you can use to develop resilience. In those pieces, I then connect you to other resources that you can get. Again, let me repeat, the most useful set of resources you can look for is something called cognitive diffusion exercises, right? Diffusion exercises. If you can Google these, you will find them very useful. Now, what's the connection between meditation, mindfulness meditation, and these resilience exercises that I'm describing? Think of these resilience exercises as building a very specific kind of skill. So I have a context, whether it's a meeting with my boss, whether it's a meeting with my board, whether it's a meeting with my subordinates, it doesn't matter, which creates stress for me. And so I'm practicing diffusing the thoughts that come up in that situation. So it's a little bit like a tennis player's practicing a forehand, right? You got to practice that forehand because that's what helps you play the game, right? But the tennis player also builds a general fitness level, right? This tennis player, he or she goes to the gym, lifts weights, does cardio. This doesn't necessarily help the strokes of tennis, the serve, whatever. It doesn't help, but it builds general fitness. To me, mindfulness meditation serves that purpose, right? I would just give you one caveat. Do not do meditation. The goal of, so typically what I find is people say, okay, I've got this app, I'm going to meditate. right? So they do their 7 minutes a day, and then it becomes one more thing that you do. You meditate in the morning. Rather, I would say exactly in the way in which you're paying attention to thoughts, just be mindful over different portions of the day. What does that mean? Well, there are different ways in which you can be mindful. You can pay attention to your body, right? And just observe the way in which your body is behaving. Or you can pay attention to your breath. Or you could pay attention to your thoughts and just not get attached to any of your thoughts. So the kind of resilience exercises that I've described are a form of mindfulness, right? So there is a connection between all of them. The modern cognitive therapies rely a lot on mindfulness, right? So they are related, but a simple way to think about them is the kind of exercises I'm describing have a specific skill that helps you play your game, and mindfulness is the general fitness you need to approach life.
We're getting close to the end, so if people have any
Okay.
final questions, this is their opportunity to put them in the Q&A tab. I want to mention that very soon we will be announcing some more intensive sessions, Narayan, that you'll be conducting in small groups. So please keep an eye out for that. You'll have a chance to work, I guess, more closely with Narayan in the weeks to come, and those will be announced soon through the LinkedIn and other official NCL channels. I want to read another comment from an attendee, again quoting, "My thoughts are not clear enough. I am stuck in the middle and unable to make serious life decisions because of this."
First step, don't worry about it. Thoughts don't have to be clear, right? Just get into the habit, and I don't know, commenter, if you already have a mindfulness practice, but if you don't, just get into the habit of calming yourself down, right? Engage, download an app, get Headspace, get Plum Village, get any one of these mindfulness apps. Just get into the habit of doing this. Second, just don't react to the thoughts. If they're not clear, it doesn't matter. Just allow yourself to be in that moment, watching those thoughts. Do this for a couple of weeks and then see what happens. If that doesn't work, INSEAD, Lifelong Learning is going to set up a LinkedIn site for this particular webinar where they will allow conversations to continue. I will attend that LinkedIn site and I will respond to the extent that I can to specific questions that I have. So try this for a couple of weeks and then come back and let me know if I can help further.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, Narayan, knowing that this is a process and that people are going to be engaged in and that you can be involved as well and continue with the dialogue. Thank you for a wonderful session, so informative. I'm sure people learned a lot. And thanks to everybody who attended. I want to invite, yes, please.
So Ben, I just wanted to say, could I just say a couple of things before
yes, please.
we close? Let me just say the following things. This is hard work. And sometimes it will not be obvious as to why you should engage in this hard work. At times like that, just spend a little bit of time connecting back with what you value. I mean, really value, right? So if you, again, to my favorite quote, the person I like a lot, Viktor Frankl, he who has a why to live for, values, meaning, can bear almost any how, right? There's another commentator, David Brooks of the New York Times, who has a question for you. He says, do you live for your resume or your eulogy? Your eulogy is what people say when you die, right? So it's what do you want them to say when you die? Those are the values that you care the most about. So every time you engage in this process of practice, thinking about whether you should, get up one more time and do this thing with the thoughts, remember why you're doing it. And if it's important enough for you, that's the reason why you do it. Thank you, Ben. I'm done.
Thanks so much. So please do join us at the Lifelong Learning LinkedIn page. Narayan is actually going to be there. He will be responding to comments and questions there. So you see the URL now on the screen. Please attend our upcoming webinars. We'd love to have you. It's a great lineup as we move into summer. And thank you again for joining, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.